As a foreign scholar who has lived in China for many years, Australian sinologist Roland Bohr and those around him have witnessed China's rapid urban transformation, expanding infrastructure, and the continuous industrial upgrading. These changes are not occasional, but part of an everyday process, accumulating, advancing, and unceasing. As China's 15th five-year plan says, basically realizing socialist modernization as a key goal. How does Bohr understood socialist modernization? And how, in his view, has China's past moved beyond Western models of modernization?
As a friend of mine from Lebanon put it, who works in Chongqing, said, when she's in China, she looks around everywhere, and there's a constant process of building things, making things, constructing things, renewing things, and so on. But when she goes to Western country, is either she sees it stagnating or, in her experience, actually destroy things. Now, that's a very on-the-ground, concrete thing. I also like to put it philosophically, and I call this a dialectical leap. Now, what does that mean? When I've been talking with people in China of my generation, I'm in my 60s now, and people in their 50s and 60s, there was a strong idea that in China people had to work really, really hard to catch up with the West, as though China was on the same path of modernization and catching up. But I look at it this way, as a kind of dialectical leap. So when you're on a road towards modernization, but they actually have different emphases, different styles, it comes out of the history and the system in which it's working, that the whole system that China has developed enables China to leap past the West, if I put it that way. So it's not following the same path as the West and trying to catch up by working hard or running harder. It's actually leaping ahead because there's a very different framework for doing so.
In Western countries, democracy is often reduced to a single word, elections. But in a society with vast population, diverse stages of development, and a highly complex social structure, is voting alone enough to sustain modern governance? China's 15th five-year plan emphasizes whole process people's democracy, highlighting consultation, dialogue, and consensus building. When Eastern and Western understandings of democracy diverge, Bohr argues that the core issue is not opposition, but recognizing that electoral democracy and consultative democracy are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist and complement each other.
If you ask someone in a Western country, can you define democracy for me? They say, oh, it's elections. And that's about it. It's elections. And that's very interesting because, to my mind, that's a very thin definition of democracy. But what about, and there's a history of this, and I published a book last year on the history and theory of socialist governance. It goes back more than 100 years now. And it's very clear that in that particular situation, we can talk definitely about concrete experience and practice in socialist democracy. Now, that's qualitatively different. And I'll limit my comments because I could go on forever about this question. In this framework, the relationship is between electoral democracy and consultative democracy. And when you've got a cultural tradition and assumption that people will talk and consult and debate and come to an agreement, this is a crucial part of democratic practice and on an everyday level. And so the fundamental relationship, there's others as well, but I'll leave it here, is between electoral and consultative democracy. That's one of the qualitative differences between, let's call it capitalist democracy and socialist democracy. They're the particularities. It's a question of the system in which the democracy grows and develops in light of the history, culture, society, etc. And why do people think Western-style capitalist democracy is a kind of false democracy? I would say it's a very thin democracy which hasn't been renewed over the last 50 years, is now facing many, many, many problems.
For a long time, modernization has been widely understood through a Western narrative: industrialization, capital accumulation, global expansion, and market competition. These ideas have shaped the global imagination of what modernization means. Yet, as the world undergoes rapid changes, marked by slow growth, social fragmentation, and rising international tensions, this model is increasingly being questioned. From Australia's colonial past, how does Professor Boer trace the deeper logic behind the capitalist modernization?
They were very much into the process of colonial occupation and imperialism. And a country where I was born, Australia, was set up as initially a colonial prison by the British, and then for raw materials. And one of the reasons for this, capitalist, Western-style capitalist development, modernisation, they needed raw materials from other parts of the world. And the way they did it was to colonise those places and bring immense suffering on the peoples in those places so they could get the raw materials for their industry and then later sell the products to the closed markets of the colonies. And unfortunately, this seems to be an inherent feature of Western-style modernisation. I would add to this that there developed in light of this framework I hesitate to call it a value, it's really just a concept, but it is this idea of I win, you lose, zero-sum thinking, zero-sum game. So the concept there is still, and you find this across the Pacific, unfortunately in the United States of America, the idea that if you win, I lose, if I win, you lose. And this became a very dominant mindset for engaging with the rest of the world, very destructive mindset.